They drove away, my mother was on her phone, not checking on me, not saying goodbye a second time, just scrolling, some moving in that slow, automatic way she did when she was already somewhere else in her mind. My stepfather had loaded the last box into the U-Haul 40 minutes earlier, and I had watched from the doorway of what used to be my bedroom, bare now, just the carpet indent where my bed had been, while he taped the back hatch shut with the focused efficiency of someone completing a job. I was 13. She came in once, near the end, looked around the empty room, then at me. "You'll be fine here until your dad picks you up," she said. "It's only a few days." She said it the way you say the dry cleaning is ready or the dishwasher needs emptying. Information delivered, box checked. My dad was supposed to pick me up Thursday. It was Monday. I didn't have a key to the new house. I didn't have the address of the new house. What I had was a sleeping bag on the floor of my old bedroom, a backpack with 4 days of clothes, $38 in a small envelope my grandmother had sent for my birthday 2 weeks prior, and my phone, which my mother had put on her plan but which, I would learn in approximately 18 hours, she had already transferred off before she left. She didn't tell me that part. The house in Phoenix was a rental on a corner lot in a neighborhood where every yard looked exactly like every other yard. Brown gravel, one cactus, a welcome mat that nobody had bought ironically. We'd moved there from Tucson when she married my stepfather 3 years before. I hadn't wanted to go. Nobody asked. I stood at the front window after the U-Haul turned the corner and watched the street go quiet. Then I sat down on the floor. I think about that moment a lot now, the sitting down. There was something in my body that understood before my brain did, that this was not a few days, that my mother had not forgotten to leave me the new address, that the timeline she gave me and the timeline she was actually operating on were not the same timeline. I was 13 and I had already learned not to bother her with questions that made her sigh, so I sat on the floor and I did not panic. And I counted the money in the envelope again, and I thought about what Thursday meant and what a few days meant, and whether those two things were even related. They were not. Thursday came. My dad didn't. I had tried to call him twice from a neighbor's phone. A woman 2 doors down, named Mrs. Kowalski, who opened the door with the particular wary expression of someone who has been asked to sign for too many packages. She let me use her landline. No answer. I left a message both times, careful and specific. "This is your daughter. I'm at the Phoenix house. Mom moved. I don't know where. Please call back." He didn't call back. Here's what I want you to understand about my father before I go further. He was not cruel. He was the kind of man who got busy and didn't notice time passing and genuinely believed that other people were fine because he hadn't heard otherwise. He had moved to Denver 2 years earlier for a job that became another job that became a whole life that didn't have a lot of room in it for logistics. He paid child support when the lawyer reminded him. He called on major holidays and my birthday and sometimes on a random Tuesday because he'd heard a song. He loved me in the way that cost him nothing. He just wasn't there. So by Thursday evening, I understood that I was not waiting for Thursday anymore. I was in a different situation than the one I had been told I was in. $38, no working phone, an empty house with utilities still on. I had checked, lights worked, water ran, because my mother's name was still on the account for another 2 weeks, which was either luck or oversight. A refrigerator that had a half-empty bottle of mustard, some baking soda, and 3 cans of Sprite she hadn't wanted to pack. I made a list on the back of a grocery receipt I found in a kitchen drawer. What I had, what I needed, what could wait. The nearest grocery store was a 14-minute walk. I know because I counted. I bought rice, a bag of dried pinto beans, 2 sleeves of crackers, a jar of peanut butter, and a box of oatmeal. I stood in the aisle for a long time doing math in my head. Calories, days, dollars, with the quiet precision of someone who had been managing small amounts of money since the 3rd grade. When my mother started giving me a 20 at the beginning of each week and calling it an allowance and not examining too carefully what happened to it, I carried everything home in 2 plastic bags, one in each hand, and I made rice on the stove that night and I ate it plain and I did not cry. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I did not cry. Not that night. I was not a child who cried easily. My mother had made that observation since I was small, usually as a compliment. She doesn't make a fuss. She said it the way she said she's very mature for her age, like a trait she had cultivated rather than something that had grown in me in the absence of someone who would have responded to the fuss. By day 4, I had settled into a rhythm. Oatmeal in the morning, rice and beans at midday, crackers with peanut butter at night. I walked to a branch library that was 18 minutes away and used their computer to try to find my dad's cell number, my mother's new address, anybody who might be relevant. I found a Facebook profile that might have been my dad's. I sent a message through the library's slow public terminal and then sat and watched the screen for 20 minutes in case he saw it instantly. He did not see it instantly. The librarian was a man named, I didn't know his name then, I only know it now, but he had a very particular way of looking at you when you'd been there too long, not unkind, just attentive. On my 3rd consecutive visit, he set a paper cup of water next to the terminal without being asked, and went back to the desk without saying anything. On day 6, my school called the house. I know this because the landline in the kitchen still worked. My mother had not yet called to disconnect it. It rang in the afternoon, and when I answered, it was the attendant's secretary asking if I was ill. I said I was. She asked if a parent was home. I said yes. She said okay and hung up. That bought me some time. I had not gone to school because I did not know what to say when they asked for an emergency contact, and I did not have a working phone, and I was afraid, this is the part I have never fully explained to anyone, I was afraid of what would happen if someone official found out. I was afraid they would call my mother, and she would be embarrassed and angry, and that would be worse somehow than what I was already managing. I'd been trained, very efficiently and over many years, to protect my mother's version of events. On day 8, I found a notebook in my backpack from the previous school year, half used, with a pen clipped to the spiral. I don't know exactly why I started writing things down. Maybe it was Mr. Sato. Mr. Sato taught 7th grade history and coached the debate team, neither of which I was in, but he had a habit of saying things in the hallway that stuck. Documentation is the difference between a complaint and a case. He had said it about historical record keeping, about why primary sources mattered, about why you had to write things down when they happened and not try to reconstruct them later from memory. I had written it in the margin of my notebook because it had sounded true in the way that some things do before you understand exactly why. I started writing. Day 1. Mom and stepfather left at 11:40 a.m. Monday. Said Dad was coming Thursday. Left $38. No new address. Phone transferred off plan, stopped working Tuesday evening. Day 4, tried calling Dad twice from Mrs. Kowalski's. Left messages. No response. Day 6, school called. Said I was sick. Day 8, bought rice, beans, oatmeal, crackers, peanut butter, $22.17 remaining. I wrote everything. Times, dates, what I ate, how much money remained, every phone call attempted and not returned. I wrote it the way you write a log, not a diary. Facts, not feelings. That was the only way I knew how to do it. On day 10, I went back to school. I went because I had run the numbers and understood that missing any more days would trigger something beyond a phone call, and I would rather control the when and how of anyone finding out than have it happen to me. I walked in on a Tuesday morning with my backpack and my attendance note, written by me, in handwriting I had been practicing since age 11 to make it look like an adult, and I sat in first period and tried to look like someone who had simply been home with a stomach thing. My English teacher was a woman. I'll call her what she was to me then, my teacher. She was 29, had been teaching for 3 years, and had the particular quality of noticing things without making a production of the noticing. That Tuesday, she looked at me for about 2 seconds longer than usual during attendance. Nothing else. After class, she asked me to stay back. She asked how I was feeling. I said better. She asked if I needed to go to the nurse. I said no. She said okay. Then she looked at me again in that same deliberate way and said, "You know where my classroom is if you need anything." Not tell me what's going on, not something seems wrong. Just, here is a location, here is an open door. I walked out and made it to the bathroom before I had to press my palms flat against the sink and breathe through my nose for 30 seconds. Not crying, just something released. A small hinge that had been locked for 10 days had moved a fraction of an inch. My mother called that night. She called the house landline, which surprised me. I had stopped expecting her. She asked how things were going with my dad, and I told her he hadn't come yet, and there was a silence that lasted long enough for me to understand she had already known that was possible. She said he was probably just running behind. I asked for her new address. She gave me a post office box number. I wrote it down. I asked when she was coming to get me. She said things were still being settled. She said a few more days in the same tone as before, and I knew by then what that meant. "You're not dramatic," she said before she hung up. "Don't start now?" I went and got the notebook. Day 10. Mom called at 8:14 p.m. Said Dad was running behind. Gave P.O. box, not a home address. Said a few more days. Call lasted 4 minutes. I started taking photos. I didn't have my own phone, but there was an old tablet my stepfather had left behind, probably forgot it, that connected to Wi-Fi if I stood close enough to the router, which was still working because the internet account was on a contract my mother apparently hadn't thought to cancel yet. I photographed the inside of the refrigerator. I photographed the sleeping bag on the floor. I photographed my grocery receipt. I photographed the cash I had remaining, spread flat on the floor so you could count it. I turned the tablet camera on myself and I said the date and I said what I had eaten that day and I said how much money I had left and I said that I had not spoken to a parent in 3 days. I was not performing. I was documenting. Evidence is the thing that gets believed. By day 14, my money was running out faster than the food. I had been careful, but careful has limits when $38 is your entire operating budget for an indefinite period. I had $9.43 left and roughly a week of oatmeal and crackers and half a jar of peanut butter. The beans were almost gone. The rice was almost gone. I had started drinking water between meals to make my stomach stop asking questions. I was losing weight. I didn't have a scale, but I could tell by the way my jeans fit. On day 15, I went to my teacher's classroom after school. I stood in the doorway for a moment because I didn't know how to start. She looked up from grading. She didn't say anything. She just waited, in the specific way of someone who has been waiting and is prepared to keep waiting. I said my mom moved out 2 weeks ago and my dad hasn't come and I don't have anyone and I don't have food. I said it in one sentence, flat and factual, the way I had been writing it in the notebook. Because that was the only register I had. The other register, the one where it would break something open in me, the one where I would understand what I was actually saying while I was saying it. I could not afford that register yet. She did not flinch. She did not say, "Oh, honey," or "That's terrible," in the way that would have made me close back down immediately. She said, "Okay." And then she asked me a series of quiet, practical questions. Did I have somewhere to sleep tonight? Was the electricity on? Did I have any family nearby? I told her about my grandmother in Albuquerque, my dad's mother. I had her number memorized because she had made me memorize it when I was 7, which at the time had seemed unnecessary. My teacher picked up her desk phone right there. She asked me to tell her the number. She dialed it. She handed me the receiver. My grandmother picked up on the second ring. I had not cried in 15 days. I cried then. My grandmother's name is Rosalind, and she is 71 years old, and she has never once in her life failed to pick up the phone. She listened to me for about 45 seconds, and then she said, "I'm coming." Not, "Let me check my schedule." Not, "Have you talked to your father?" Just, "I'm coming." Like it was the only possible response, and she was a little surprised I hadn't called sooner. She drove from Albuquerque to Phoenix. 7 hours. She left that night. My teacher sat with me in the classroom for 2 hours until Rosalind arrived. She made me a cup of instant oatmeal from a packet she had in her desk drawer, and she asked me about the notebook, and I showed it to her, and she read it without speaking. When she finished, she set it on the desk and looked at me and said, "I have to make a report." I knew what that meant. I said, "Okay." She said, "It's not punishment. It's protection." I said I knew. She said she was going to make the call tonight, and that tomorrow there would be people at school asking me questions, and she needed me to tell them the same things I had told her, as factually as I had told her, and to show them the notebook if they asked. I said I would. She said, "You did the right thing coming here." I remember thinking, and I did not say this, that I almost hadn't, that I had stood in that doorway for longer than she probably knew, running the calculation, balancing the cost of speaking against the cost of staying silent, the way I had been trained to do since I was small enough to believe that the cost of speaking was always higher. My grandmother arrived at 11:17 p.m. She walked into that school building with her coat still on from the drive and found me in the front office with my teacher, and she didn't say anything. She just put her arms around me and held on, and I let her. She smelled like the soap she had used my whole life. The caseworker assigned to my case was a woman who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times and found no satisfaction in any individual instance of it, but who was precise and thorough in a way that I recognized as different from bureaucratic going through the motions. She came to my grandmother's hotel room the next morning with a colleague, and she asked me to walk her through everything chronologically from the day my mother left. I had the notebook. She read every page. She did not skip anything. When she finished, she asked if there was anything else. I told her about the tablet. I told her about the videos. She asked to see them. I showed her all 11 of them. She watched each one fully. She made notes. Before she left, she said, "You're very organized, Mia. That matters a lot. Mia is my name." It had been 17 days since anyone had said it. What assembled itself in the following weeks was, according to the family attorney my grandmother hired, one of the more thorough records she had seen from a child. Dated journal entries, time-stamped video documentation, grocery receipts, a phone record subpoena that confirmed my mother had transferred my line off her account on the morning of the day she left, before the U-Haul had even arrived. Not an oversight. A preparation. My mother had also, the record showed, used the moving expenses reimbursement from my stepfather's new job, a package worth just over $20,000, to cover the deposit and first 3 months on a house in Scottsdale. She had filled out the new school enrollment forms for my half-sister, who was 6, within 48 hours of arriving. She had not submitted any forms for me. She had not contacted my school to transfer my records. She had not, in the most literal administrative sense, brought me with her. My stepfather maintained that he had assumed my mother was handling it. My mother maintained that she had assumed I would go to my father. My father maintained that he hadn't known. This is what happens when 3 adults each assume that the gap they are leaving is someone else's gap to fill. The gap was me. Arizona has mandatory reporting requirements for child abandonment, and the case moved quickly once my teacher's report was filed. There was a hearing. My grandmother had already submitted emergency guardianship paperwork. The judge, a woman who spoke in measured, unhurried sentences and had clearly read the full file before she walked in, approved it within 2 weeks. My mother came to the hearing. She wore the blazer she wore when she wanted to look serious. She had an attorney. She said she had never intended for any harm to come to me and that there had been a miscommunication about arrangements, and that she was prepared to have me come stay with her as soon as the situation was sorted. The judge asked her to specify what miscommunication. My mother said there had been a misunderstanding about who was responsible for my pickup. The judge asked her to specify who she had confirmed pickup arrangements with before leaving. My mother said she had expected my father to coordinate. The judge asked when she had confirmed this expectation with my father. My mother said she hadn't confirmed it directly but had assumed. The judge looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then she read from the documentation. The date the phone line was transferred. The date the school enrollment was filed for my half-sister. The date my records were not transferred. She read the video timestamps. She did not editorialize. She just read. The room was quiet when she finished. My mother turned to look at me once. I was sitting next to my grandmother, and I looked back at her, and I didn't look away because I was 14 by then, and something in me had finished being afraid. The judge granted my grandmother permanent guardianship. My parents were each charged with child abandonment. My mother accepted a plea, 18 months probation, mandatory parenting classes, community service hours, and a felony on her record. My father, whose failure was one of omission rather than intent, but who was still a man who had not answered his phone when his daughter left 7 messages in 3 days, received a similar arrangement. Their attorney called it a misunderstanding. The judge called it neglect. I live in Albuquerque now. I have lived here for 5 years. My grandmother's house is not large. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that smells like coffee by 7 a.m. every single morning, a backyard with a garden she has been tending since before I was born. She writes my school events on a paper calendar on the refrigerator door. She comes to everything. When I got into the University of New Mexico on a full scholarship, she cried before I did. She puts the newspaper on the table at breakfast and asks me what I think about things, and then actually listens to my answer. I am applying to law schools this fall. I want to work in child welfare advocacy. Mr. Sato would probably appreciate the full circle nature of that. My mother emails occasionally. Careful, short emails written in the slightly formal register of someone who is aware that every word could be read by someone else. She says she is in therapy. She says she understands what she did. In the most recent one, she said she was proud of me, and then, to her credit, she acknowledged that she had no particular standing to say so. I haven't replied. I'm not sure whether I will. Some days it feels like it would be a relief to put it somewhere. To write back and say I know, I understand. Let's figure out what this can be now. Other days I think that the version of me who stood in a doorway for a month worth of bad decisions, weighing whether my need was worth the cost of asking, that version of me deserves the right to not perform forgiveness on anyone else's timeline. The decision is mine. That is something that took me years to understand I was allowed to have. I was 13 years old, and I made a list, and I documented everything, and I stood in a doorway, and I finally opened my mouth. I was told for so long in the particular language families use that is never quite a sentence but is always somehow understood, that my silence was the price of belonging, that making the fuss would cost more than absorbing the damage, that a child who didn't need much was easier to love than a child who did. I needed things. I always had. I just had no one to need them from yet. If you are someone who learned to make yourself small to fit inside someone else's version of your own life, I want you to know that the documentation matters, the notebook matters, the staying in the doorway a little longer matters, and so does the moment you finally stop staying. Tell someone. Write it down first if you have to. Say it flat and factual if that's the only way it will come out. The truth doesn't need to be performed to be believed. It just needs to be said. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in an abstract way, in the very specific, practical way of someone who watched a chain of small decisions made by adults over many years arrive, inevitably at a 13-year-old sitting on a bare floor counting $38. My mother did not wake up one morning and decide to abandon me. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. What happened was quieter than that and more cumulative. It was every time she said she doesn't make a fuss like it was a virtue she had given me, rather than something I had grown in the absence of safety. It was every field trip form I signed myself. Every meal I made at 9 years old because no one had thought about dinner. Every time I learned to shrink the ask until there was no ask at all. She built a version of me that required very little, and then she made a decision that required me to require nothing. The math worked out in her head. That's the part that keeps me up sometimes. Not that she was monstrous, but that she was logical. She had been training me for years for exactly that moment, and she trusted the training. What she didn't account for was Mr. Sato. She didn't account for a history teacher who said documentation is the difference between a complaint and a case, and a 13-year-old who wrote it in a margin because it rang true before she knew why. She didn't account for a notebook, or a forgotten tablet, or 11 videos time-stamped and factual and completely immune to the word misunderstanding. She didn't account for Rosalind driving 7 hours in the dark without being asked twice. Here is what I believe about intelligence. For whatever it's worth from someone who is 20 now and still figuring most of it out, it is not the same thing as being told you're smart. It is the capacity to look at a situation clearly without the softening that panic or wishful thinking provides, and to act on what you see. I was 13 and I counted calories per dollar and I wrote the time on everything, and I understood without anyone explaining it to me that the truth needs to be recorded in order to survive contact with people who will dispute it. That wasn't something I was taught. It was something I figured out because I had to. Necessity is an extraordinary teacher. It is also a brutal one, and I would not recommend it, and I would not wish it on any child who hasn't been given a better option. What I want to say about courage, about what it actually means to keep going when you are running out of food and running out of money and running out of the particular energy it takes to hold yourself together, is that it doesn't feel like courage when you're in it. It feels like arithmetic. It feels like, I have this much left, so I do this next. The bravery is invisible from the inside. You only see it from the other side, looking back, realizing that you kept moving through 17 days of a situation that was not your fault and not your responsibility and not something you deserved, and you did it without losing the thread of who you were. My mother's choices had consequences she did not intend. My grandmother's choice to pick up the phone on the second ring had consequences she did intend, fully, and has never once acted like they were a burden. The caseworker who watched 11 videos without skipping a single one had consequences ripple outward from her thoroughness that she probably never tracked. My teacher who left a door open without making it a demand. I think about her every time I'm in a situation where someone near me is standing at a threshold trying to decide if the cost of asking is worth it. I want to be the person who makes that cost feel smaller. That's what I'm studying for. That's the whole thing.